Oh, the 70s, a time of new beginnings and endings as we look at the opening of Disney World and the Beatles' breakup, the premiere of MASH, the birth of VCR, Apple, and we can't forget the good old pocket-sized calculators. Oh, how life would be without. The 70s was nonetheless a time where citizens passionately practiced their rights. As the war in Vietnam came to an end, new social causes came to the fore. And without a doubt, the 1977 Supreme Court case, National Socialist Party v. Skokie, was no exception. In 1977, the National Socialist Party of America announced its intention to march through a predominantly Jewish community of Skokie, Illinois. Skokie was at that time a village with a 57% Jewish population, and a number of its residents were survivors of Nazi concentration camps. The party leader of the NSPA, Franklin Collin, who described the party as being a Nazi organization, proposed to hold a peaceable public demonstration to protest against the regulations on the use of the village's public parks for political assemblies. The demonstrators were to wear the uniform of the party, which included a swastika, and they were told to hold banners, which also included statements like "Free speech for the white man." Three primary arguments set forth by Skokie in support of its effort to forbid the march. First, the village argued that the display of the swastika promoted hatred against persons of Jewish faith or ancestry, and that speech that promotes racial or religious hatred is unprotected by the First Amendment. The American Civil Liberties Union, also known as ACLU, despite severe criticism of support by many of its strongest supporters, represented the First Amendment rights of the Nazis. Subsequently, the Cook County Circuit Court issued an injunction prohibiting participants from wearing Nazi uniforms or displaying swastikas. The issue regarding the refusal of temporary suspension was then brought before the U.S. Supreme Court on a writ of certiorari. The courts decided a person's assertion their speech is being restrained must be reviewed immediately by the judiciary, by requiring the state court to consider the neo-Nazis' appeal without delay. The U.S. Supreme Court decision opened the door to allowing the National Socialist Party of America to march. In the end of the Illinois Supreme Court, the United States Court of Appeals, and the United States Supreme Court contributed to the conclusion that Skokie could not stop the Nazis from marching. The courts rightly rejected this argument, not on ground that the swastika doesn't promote religious hatred, but on the ground that this is not a reason for suppressing speech. As the Supreme Court voted on a 5-4 vote, it states, "In defining the constitutional rights of the parties who come before this court, we are, of course, bound by the pronouncements of the United States Supreme Court in its interpretation of the United States Constitution." Ableman v. Booth, 1859, Cooper v. Aaron, 1958, and the Cohen v. California in 1780, in our opinion, compel us to permit the demonstration as proposed, including display of the swastika. It is firmly settled that our Constitution, the public expression of ideas, may not be prohibited merely because the ideas are themselves offensive to some of their hearers. Also protected by the Batchelor v. Maryland in 1970. And it is entirely clear that the wearing of distinctive clothing can be symbolic expression of a thought of philosophy. The symbolic expression of thought falls within the free speech clause of the First Amendment, Tinker v. Des Moines Independent Community School District, 1969. The First Amendment is one that gets challenged and questioned often, and as a result has put me in a conflict on whether the case closed was and is justified. Under the Geneva Conventions, which protect prisoners of war and civilians, my rightful moral will have to tie under the understanding that it was not constitutional. The intent that the Nazis had on wanting to march in a sanctuary community was a call for disruption of peace and security by any means. Nonetheless, the Supreme Court case had ignited controversy and challenged our understanding of a commitment to the First Amendment values in the Supreme Court. And in civil work, such as the impact it had on the ACLU, most importantly, a museum on the main street of Skokie to commemorate those who had died in the concentration camps. Although I may call this case unjustified, I do believe it is an important case that brought a big impact and awareness